Hey, this is Tom Jones. Welcome to Volume 2 of Tom Talks. Tonight we've gathered and assembled an amazing group of people, family, friends, etc., because we want to have a straight talk and a conversation about not only Black artists, but their responsibility, not only in the coming racial pandemic, but also what is the responsibility as we look at artists being a catalyst for social change. What is our voice? What do we say? How do we speak not only to the larger community, but how also do we speak to those institutions that in fact are responsible for the dissemination of culture and art in our communities. To give a backdrop, I think when we look at protest movement, particularly in the 60s and those who came out of the Black arts movement, artists recognized and theaters recognized and that not only did they have a responsibility to social protests, but they were actively involved in the agenda for the liberation of African American people and people in general. So in the South, in New Orleans, Free Southern Theater takes on as its responsibility the idea of voter registration. In Atlanta, Hosea Williams' SCLC People Survival Theater takes on the issue of income inequality and how is it that we begin to level the playing field. In New York, you had 150 African American theaters under the Black Theater Alliance that found as its responsibility the inclusion of marginalized communities, the bringing in of playwrights, actors, artists, designers to level the playing field. From those initiatives, we had things like the National Endowment of the Arts creating things like Expansion Arts, so that the voices of those in marginalized communities had access and could be heard. You had allies like Joseph Papp creating something called the Public Theater, which found as its mission first of all, creating 4 stages so that different members of the community could come and that art should be free. So therefore he creates something called Shakespeare in the Park at Central Park, which still, resounds today as a living memorial in the summertime where people come and actually view art for free. Given that context and that backdrop, I will reference Dave Chappelle, who a couple of weeks said that young people have created an answer. They are the answer, that they are the protest. They have become the change that we have asked for. In that context, I want to turn the conversation over not only to this intergenerational group of artists, but to specifically the young artists and activists that are here that we've assembled to talk about not only what change looks like and what is the change that they are asking for, but beyond that, let's start with a question before we go into that. As a Black artist, what is the world that you can imagine for yourself? What is that ideal world? What does that look like? And I don't mean getting a job. I don't mean just having access. I mean, what if there were no oppression? If you didn't have to deal with racism and systematic racism? As an artist, as a Black artist, what is the world that you want to create for yourself?
So the ideal world for me, and my name is Jarrell Brown, by the way. The ideal world for me as a young Black theater artist is to be able to be a part of diversity, to feel like I can play any role imaginable, no matter what my skin color is, no matter if I'm Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, because I am tired of like seeing how segregated our theater has been ever since I moved out to Atlanta. From Houston, Texas, I'm so used to diversity casting because the colleges that I went to U of H, and we did Anne Frank. I was able to play a Black Jew in front of a group of audiences who are used to that certain type of casting in colleges. But once I got out into the real world, I started to see how segregated our community is still. I have been highly disappointed and upset to see that the only story that I can tell at the moment is just Black stories. I'm used to telling Jewish stories, Holocaust stories, murder mysteries, and other plays. There are not just the Black plays. But once I got out here, I started to experience like, oh, you're not suitable for this role. And I never understood why. And I started to find like, oh, it's because of my skin color, of course. Because the first time I moved out to Atlanta, the first role I ever gotten was with Cherokee Theater Company. And we did, and then there were none. And I was the only Black person in that play. I had a strategic role. His name was Philip Lombard, and he was one of the agents that was discovering what was happening in the murder mansion. But people aren't accustomed to that. People don't know how to handle that kind of situation. So I was just very surprised to see that the audience that I was performing for was just for white, and the only people that were in the audience was just my mom and my girlfriend. And they were highly uncomfortable because they were wondering, oh, this is what's happening in our theater community, that people are accustomed to seeing a Black African American person that's playing a white role. So yes, just more diversity.
Gotcha. James.
All right. I would say along in the same vein that representation and seeing ourselves in multiple areas would be idealistic to me, both in the performance, administrative, executive, creative, all senses of being in the forefront. Because going back with my history, I'm from Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and the Black Repertory Company, along with the Black Theater Festival, was the first time that I saw Black artists. Black artists didn't exist before then. It was only seeing things in white neighborhoods or in expensive museums or all of these things, and I was only able to get to see that if it was a community day or something like that, because my mom couldn't afford it and things such as that. So when I got older, got to high school and started doing theater, started finding my artistic bone and started trying to flex that, I not only was met with, however many looks we were getting from people not of color like us, but also going back to my neighborhood where I'm from, people aren't artists where I'm from. People don't do theater. People don't do this. So it's viewed a certain way. And it shouldn't be viewed that way. But it's only because we were never represented in that sense, or representation of that has not been so embracive like our, other counterparts, so to speak. The idea that being an athlete or being an entertainer or something like that is the only way that you can be in front of people and not be a sellout or have a certain cognization about how you are. It's just I don't know. I think for me the biggest thing would be able to be whatever we could be, whether that's artistic, medical, whatever, and it not be a unique circumstance. Like it be a norm, not having to try twice as hard just to get some type of accolade, but getting the accolade just by being us, just by doing us, and just by being able to be a person.
Gotcha. So we got this sense of being able to explore one's humanity, and as Gerald said, that non-traditional casting, being able to see other things. Brittany, dream a world. What does the world look like for you?
Hi, everyone. I'm Brittany. I'm an actor and playwright here in Atlanta, and I've worked with Rising a couple of times and worked with Tom last summer. I think the world, as an artist, if I could have my way, would just be more stories. Why do we have that one story a year in a season? Why is it that one Black show? Why is it that one Black musical? Why is it that one Black superhero that took us 20 years to get? Why does Hollywood, why don't we have the photograph came out this year with Issa Rae, and it was just beautiful. Like, why don't we have more just love stories? It isn't just like we're Black and we've struggled, What about just the overall stories? What about the romantic comedies, So I just would like to see a world where we had more stories across the board, and they didn't all, the ones that were nominated weren't always about the worst times in our history for awards. I just would like to see.
Let me not push back on it, and I will turn it on it. You speak of the one Black superhero, so let's go to Wakanda. That was an idyllic world that was unimpinged on by colonialism and by white folk. We saw a world that was imagined, and what that world could look like when it was uninterrupted by colonialism, when it was uninterrupted by imperialism, that was its own design. That's my question. Beyond variety, and I get that. That's, I think, our response to a larger community that says they ghettoized or localized our stories in a certain sense, or they get to curate and pick and choose what it is that they either want their audience or our audiences to see. I want you to dream a world, and I will continue on, and I would circle back to others, that is devoid of colonialism. What is that world for the Black artist that has nothing to do with appealing to white sensibility and giving us permission to do the stories that we want? What does that look like? That's what I want.
Received.
I'm going to throw it back to you, Brittany. What does that look like?
I was like, you said you was moving on, Tom. Well, I'm gonna just steal it. It's Wakanda, but I think it's so hard for me to answer that question, to be very honest, because I grew up in the South, and my shape of being is a Black woman in the South. So
Okay.
I don't know what those things look like if we weren't brought here, over, and all this oppression that we've experienced. I mean, my grandmother was born in 1924. So, and I lived with her. My grandfather born in 1915. I lived with them. Like, you hear the stories of the struggle from the Great Depression through the Civil Rights Movement, through what they went through all their lives. So I don't think that I have the best context to say, oh, if there was no oppressor, what does that look like? Just to be honest.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to keep circling back on that. Who's up next? Is that you, Derek?
Yeah, for me, I would agree with everyone said, but also I would just say being able to freely tell stories the way that I want them to be told, just freely tell whatever stories that I want without having to alter them or having to like make any adjustments to my story. And instead of recycling these same stories that we always see, having ownership of our work, taking it back, bringing it back to our community, making it accessible to our community. I remember in high school, I asked my acting teacher in high school, after I learned about August Wilson when I came to college. I graduated from Clark Atlanta University. Shout out to CAU out there in the world. But I didn't know who August Wilson was until I came to college. And I thought that was very problematic just for myself. And I asked my high school teacher, I said, why don't we read August Wilson? She was like, well, I don't think the students here would appreciate that. Why won't we appreciate it? Because we don't know about it. Or how do you know whether or not we'll be able to appreciate it? Because we don't know. So I think if we just make theater and art more accessible in those communities that can't afford these $100 tickets to go see theater, I think that'll make room for a lot. So yeah.
And so, so expanding conversation, stories that are uncensored, that are unrestricted, that we can tell without apology, as Zora Neale Hurston would say, to be unapologetically colored. Gotcha. Okay. Amina, I'm moving to you.
Hey, so yes, my name is Amina. I just finished up the apprenticeship at Horizon. An ideal world in theater. As Brittany said, I don't know what that would look like without an oppressor. I can imagine all day long, but realistically, I think that it still is necessary to have stories that, tell about, our history as Black people and what we've gone through. I think that's very necessary. And I think that it's imperative that those stories are directed by Black directors. I personally feel it is disrespectful for someone who hasn't experienced those things to direct a Black play. And I want to see more Black stories written by Black people. And I want to, when I joined theater, I joined it because it was fun and, it felt freeing as an artist. But I want to be able to be in the room without feeling restricted, without feeling like, I have to tell my story a certain way, because that feels very boxed in, and I don't want to have to feel like I have to play a stereotype. I don't want to be that one Black girl who has to be, hey girl, what's up? Like, I don't want to have to do that. It's disgusting. And, there's so many colors of Black people and shades of Black. And I want to see more of that. I'm tired of seeing the same type of Black person. I want to hear more of our voice in the spaces. So.
Someone once told me that it's hard to ask for freedom if you don't know what freedom looks like. And so part of what I want to do in terms of expanding this conversation is, what does freedom look like to us? And that it's very hard as we begin to approach allies and other institutions to ask them to be advocates on our own behalf if we don't know what freedom looks like. If we don't know what that world that is that we imagine, how is it that we then communicate that to other people? That's further down the road in terms of as we continue the conversation. I think we're going to Connor, Clark, alphabetically, King, Marguerite, Adai. Maybe that's with the next series of things in terms of answering that question. Robert, I know you are not only an actor and an artist, but you're also a producer in an institution. So can you speak to what that world looks like for you?
I think to me, economics drives a lot of my mindsets, because I know that the economic and the power paradigm is what really kind of bottlenecks for a lot of Black organizations. And so being now a producing agent, one of my good friends, I won't say who she is, S. Renee Clark, we were having these conversations, and, I started really getting into producing, and she goes, "Oh, you've gone to the other side." And she said it in jest, but I do understand that. I think that this needs to be, we need to fortify our creative, our people that are creative with understanding the economics and the commerce of their art, because we tend to be a little dependent on white organizations to provide platforms to our stories, as if really the white organizations have some investment other than the commerce of our art. Now, I won't say that there aren't white allies and white organizations that find value in our stories, but I guarantee you that commerce is the driving force, and not just because of ticket sales. I'm talking about the commerce you receive by the facade of diversity. And so, art is funded in these days. So the young ladies talked about, what does it look like? Or you asked Tom, what does it look like if we didn't have the colonial kind of oppression? And she made a valid point. We don't have a reference of what that looks like, but I do think that she made a point about Black plays should not be directed by white people. And I kind of have misgivings about that, because I do think it, just from the opportunity standpoint, Black people should be given at least the opportunity to do that. But, there will always be that antithesis that'll say, well, does that mean Black people shouldn't direct white plays? And just as being a soothsayer, but really it's not about who should direct one. It's like, let's be honest about the opportunities. If it was a non-colonial oppressed society, then we wouldn't be thinking like that, because the opportunities would be equal. We wouldn't even be thinking about there would be a non-factor. So I won't go on and on and on, but that's my 2 cents right now.
No, so it's opening up. You're saying making available that there should be an economic floor that has parity, that
Absolutely.
We should have the same access to resources that every other institution has.
Well, that's why we're protesting. That's like, it's no mystery that systematically the opportunities are limited, and and it's based on a racial issue, and so, yes, if you level the playing field, and it will produce stories like this young man said, that don't necessarily have to play the Black kid or the ratchet girl, because you were all not trying to squeeze through a hole and conform to certain norms that they dictate to get a platform,
I totally agree. And pushing the conversation, and I'll go to you. As Chappelle said, the streets have spoken, and what they've spoken is to the issue of economic justice, to your point, Rob. And economic justice at some point means, when they say defund the police, it's a reallocation of resources to those institutions that deal with the whole welfare of our community. So that's not means if you don't want a policeman to show up at your door, because Lord knows I live in some neighborhoods that I would want a policeman to show up at my door. What I don't want is to open the door and fear that I'm going to be viewed as the enemy, 1. Or 2, that if it's a domestic dispute, that there's not a social worker that comes with it, what are the reasons why we have those issues? It's because there's been economic undermining in our communities, and certainly an economic undermining in terms of our institutions, including cultural. I'll shift to you, Renee. Dream a world. Tell me what it looks like for you as a Black artist.
Oh, yeah. For me as a Black artist, I dream a world where I embrace everything Black. I embrace it all. I embrace everything from, okay, let me back up for just a second. So I, 2 things. I did a show in Calgary, in Canada, all Black show, The Kink in My Hair, 900 seater. showed up 900 people, white Canadians, every night. They said they go to see shows about other cultures so that they can learn about the other culture. It appears as though quite often in America, we go to see ourselves on stage, and we're not very interested in learning about another culture. We just need to see ourselves. That's number one. Number two, I did a show at the Center for Puppetry Arts, and it was based around the stories at the Brer Rabbit stories. So we went over to the Wren's Nest, and I was looking through some books, and they had outlawed some images, and that's when they moved to the animals to illustrate in the books. And when I looked at the pictures, I said, oh my God, they look like me. I'm outlawed because of my little round forehead. I'm outlawed because my face is too exotic. I don't look American enough. What? I'm against the law. Of course, that hurt my heart. So we have children that grow up on one side of the track, and they are taught to speak in with perfect speech, and then they can't play with Quisha because Quisha is beneath them. Or I love Michelle Obama. I love Hattie McDaniel. I love Lorraine Hansberry. I love Aunt Jemima. I don't understand why we can't embrace all of us. How come I can't play Sister Girl? Why can't I play the college professor? I don't understand why I can't love on all of me, not just the piece that I think somebody else might accept, or the piece I'm going to put down, the piece that everybody else has made to feel like they're unworthy. I remember when I first saw Keisha's name on the billboard, and I said, we're going to have a mayor named Keisha? Really? We finally got here? We're going to have Mayor Keisha, and we have Mayor Keisha. So I'm just saying, me as an artist, can I embrace it all? The music, the everything. Here's my last point, and I'm not gonna talk too long. I did a show called Black Pearl Sings, and I had to study the music of Lead Belly. And when I found Lead Belly in the Library of Congress, there was Creedence Clearwater Revival, all this country music, all this rock music that I had no idea had been created by a Black man. I thought it was all white people music. No school had to bring that to me. I went looking for that, and I found that. And here's the man who wrote, when I was a little bitty baby, my mama used to rock me in the crate in them old cotton fields back home. That was also recorded by Harry Belafonte. That was also recorded by other people. But now we too good to talk about cotton. That's beneath us. But when I embrace slavery, I embrace the strongest people on planet Earth. That's how I feel about them. And I will never, ever, ever turn my back like I don't want to talk about them, because that's just perpetuating an image or something that I'm ashamed of, or am I celebrating like the Jews get to celebrate?
Well, let me roll it. Let me roll it on.
I'm through. I'm done.
Because the king needs to speak. But just to piggyback on your point, so what the poet Sonia Sanchez said, that we have to learn to embrace ourselves in all our majesty and our non-majesty. And that when you deal with the 360 degrees of our experience, that we are not slaves, we're an enslaved people. So just in our language and how we describe ourselves, so somebody says, I don't want to tell slave stories. And I'm like, yeah, I do, because I want to tell the story of the people of triumph. And what is the lens through which we talk about? If you talk about it in terms of dread and strum, yes, I understand that sometimes you don't want to revisit and relive that pain. But to exercise that pain, you have to kind of visit it. As you deal with any kind of therapy, you can't run away from what it is that you are. And two, again, that is part of our majesty. I was never a slave. I'm not a descendant of slaves. I'm a descendant of enslaved people. And that's a different conversation that we have to have. Go ahead, King. What's the world you dream of?
And I got so many cosigns on on what's been said. But the thing that sticks out for me is a conservatory of knowledge. perfect world would be going back to the times where we told the stories of the ones that came before us and the ones that are still with us in appreciation, and passed it down and continually passed it down, because those aspects of those stories and that knowledge is so important. And I say conservatory because it also needs to be an understanding of where you are when you start. Even if you have a certain degree of ability, there's so much more you can learn and so far you can grow. You have to have an understanding, though. So sit down at the feet of ones that came before you, who are not speaking in terms, who are not speaking in a way to say, you need to do it like this. It's just saying, listen, these are the lessons that I learned. Because I know when I was younger, somebody told me not to do something. I need to do it any damn way. So I need to learn by myself to be like, oh, that's why you said not to do that. Okay, I got you. That's why you told me not to scream so loud every time I stand on the stage, because my voice gonna go out and I got 8 more shows to do. So that is one aspect of it. The freedom to cultivate and create any kind of story, that's already been said as well. But also absolutely the economic aspect of it. The perfect world of envisioning from the top to the bottom, the Black artistic director, the Black managing director, the Black producing director, the Black stage manager, the Black lighting director, the Black set designer, just a complete immersion. Because when that happens, something happens in the room that lets people feel safe in a safe space. And I want to expand on that safety, because there are different people going through different experiences, and younger people may feel some way about the older heads, and older people may feel some way about the younger heads. But getting in a space where we all feel comfortable in whatever story is being told, from the crack dealers to the slaves, to the futuristic, romantic, steampunk stories to be told, like so many different facets of it. So when I think about that, I think about completely open, but comfortable in sitting down and learning more. Because when I learn about my past, it helps elevate my future.
I'm the product of an inferior education, and so sometimes I get alphabetical order out of place. Let me circle back. Marguerite, Dream of World. Went so to the K and forgot that H was before that. Woo! Don't get old, Marguerite. Don't get old. Dream of World. Tell me what that looks like.
So I feel like I had half of the world and didn't realize it, because back in the day when there was Jumonde, when there was St. Louis Black Rep, when we just told stories and they were played, it didn't make any difference. I knew that it was the best homegoing experiences of my life, but I did not know how fleeting and how precious and how they would not be around forever. You know what I'm saying? I mean, those are still the memories that sustain me in theater right now. And then what I didn't know, because back then I was just an actor. Now I would say, if that could happen with the same financial base that would allow things to just flourish, because not being in the office, I didn't know what kind of struggles you guys were coming through to be able to create this utopic moment in rehearsal. And oh man, you know those times when people have a potluck between a 2-show day. I mean, baby, you know, you didn't care what role you had. You wanted to be there for the potluck. I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Or the cast party.
Or the cast party. Or the cast party, you know? And the thing is, even when I started working at predominantly white institutions and we were still doing our own plays, I started to sense this little tension where it was like, oh, okay, well, you go tell them or whatever. But in our little bubble, you know, we were still like, this was still homegoing. This was still like, I am an actor because these are my people. And now it's just plays. You know, there is no home. It's just plays. And people come, sometimes you connect, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you have a good show, and then you go home.
So just to recap before I get to you, Moon. Yeah, thank you, Margaret. It's the dreaming of the world in terms of what I'm hearing is that we have a home where there's a multiplicity of stories that can be told, where we can play any particular role that we want to play without a level of scrutiny, where economics are in fact not a restrictive, inhibiting factor, where we can embrace the majesty and the non-majesty, where we finally are free to dream, as you said, Brittany, a world that is free of those kind of colonial restraints, having never been there, so that even if we don't know what that looks like, we at least can imagine what that is. We know that the Wakanda story, that that was an imagined. That was a sense of saying, returning to Malcolm and returning to Martin, saying, what would the world, or returning to Walter Rodney, or returning to all of those intellectuals and activists involved when said, what would the world look like if that didn't exist? The reason why they went to an African-American artist that was right here in East Point to create the laboratory was because they said, we want you to imagine what that looks like. You work every day in a space that you create as an artist, as a visual artist. And we want you to recreate that in here, not being inhibited. And what we get then is a certain sense, an alchemy of our collective genius. And what does that look like when it's not restrained, when it's not inhibited, and when it's not censored? Go ahead, Moon.
Man, I gotta go after Marguerite. Because
that's why I put King first, because I knew he'd yield his time. But
I'm glad I didn't have to go after her too.
Yeah. But she pretty much said everything that I feel. I mean, I feel so blessed, especially just, thinking about this over the past couple of weeks. I feel really blessed to have been raised and trained in Black institutions most of my life. And so because of that, the world that I think you're speaking of, Tom, and because at my core, I am a student, will always be a student of Black culture, Black art, Black theater. And so because I'm a student of that, I know that we have created work that reflects that world. That world exists. I think the thing is, we haven't had the opportunity to show that world to the rest of the world. And I think it's largely because we don't have the institutional structures that give us the space to share those stories, to share the diversity of Blackness. Like, I'm thinking about Topsy's monologue at the end of Colored Museum. And this idea that I want to hear stories that tell about the messiness of us, the beauty of us, the complexity of us, and they need to be Black as fuck all the time. Right. And for me, Blackness is it's not a limiting thing. It's the most expansive thing on the planet. And I think it's important for us to know that and to embrace that. I'm a theater nerd, and I love Ibsen and Strindberg, but I don't need that to fill my soul. I need work by artists who tell our stories. And I need spaces for that work to continue. And I need us to find ways to support Black institutions that tell the diversity of those narratives.
Yeah, to go back to what you're saying in terms of referencing George Wolfe's, Colored Museum, where the Topsy Washington in the party saying, I see Malcolm X having a discussion with Aunt Jemima on the dialectics of the shuffleball change.
Exactly.
Embracing our colored contradictions. Yeah, no, exactly. And that, I often said, just running a theater for some 20 odd years, that there aren't enough hours in the day to tell our stories.
Right.
There are just too many of them. Right. And so, yes.
And I also need us too, and Tom and I talked about this a lot. I need us as Black artists to know our fucking canon and to know the breadth and the width of it, and not simply August Wilson, but to know the breadth and the width of our canon, because that's where our power is.
And also then in that, and I think that goes to your point, King, that you don't start demeaning Tyler Perry because you recognize he's part of a larger tradition. He's a part of an oral storytelling tradition that embraces vaudeville, that embraces, what minstrelsy really was and how it is that we came out of that in terms of telling our street stories in a certain kind of way. And he's simply tapping into that. If you teach him in terms of cultural literacy within the context of African-American literature, to your point, then you don't single him out as being an abnormal or an aberration. He makes $1 billion because he taps into the very wealth and soul of Black storytelling.
That's one of the reasons why I love learning about Stepin Fetchit. Why I learning about Lincoln Perry is because I also recognize that a lot of people did not like what he did not like what he conveyed on in movies and things of that nature. But he did help further the cause of the appearance of us, and I appreciate his artistry and what he did. And a lot of those old vaudevillian talents that went on to movies and things of that nature, I appreciate what they did because that's a part of the historical aspect. In the same way that I can look at Tyler Perry and what he does, and people that will come behind him and things of that nature. That while there are some people that I may not necessarily agree with how they're doing it, but it is important that it's done because, as the younger brother said before, a lot of times when you just being able to see yourself and see somebody appreciate yourself on the stage, it does bring a power in you. It does let you know that, yes, you are being seen and yes, you are being heard and you're not being treated as less than.
Well, and also if you had 200 Tyler Perrys, that were creating all different kinds of stories, then you would have a level playing field. The difference between Tyler Perry and Stepin Fetchit, for example, is Stepin Fetchit had to operate within the construct. His genius had to operate within a construct of a racial paradigm that was about his abnegation, that was about demeaning and devaluing who he was. So the genius has to poke through. Tyler's unabridged. He gets to say, no, I can be unapologetic in telling all of these stories, and I can make $1 billion doing it. And in doing that, it gives me to your point, Rob, it gives me access. It gives me freedom. I don't have to respond to what the union tells me. I tell the union what to do because I have a whole coterie of people who want this job. Shifting just slightly, and this is for everybody, to open up. Thank you all, first of all, for that. I think that was really kind of enough genius to hold me for a couple of weeks. But beyond that, if we start looking at this thing called, and we are, structural racism, does it exist in these institutions, and predominantly white institutions, cultural institutions, art institutions? How does it exist? If it does, even if it's conscious and unconscious on their part, what are the ways in which predominantly white institutions may be complicit in contributing to structural racism, or how is it that they've diffused it? That's to anybody in the room.
And I have a question that came in the chat that kind of piggybacks on that. I'm going to ask, it says anonymous attendee. Do you want me to read your question or do you
Hold on, Margaret. I think what we said we're going to do is wait till the last 30 minutes.
Okay.
And then read all those questions so that we can continue just our conversation. But
all right, cool beans.
We'll come to her first. So again, structural, for those of you, and I know, Margaret, you work in a predominantly white institution, so I know you work from the inside. Some of us work from the outside, are there as visitors and come out. Do you think that there was structural racism in these arts institutions? And if you don't want to say anything because you don't want to be in the crosshairs, that's okay.
No, I mean, I ain't scared.
No.
No, the thing is, yes, there is, because you are working through someone else's lens.
Gotcha. Go through that. What does that look like to you? In other words, I hear people talk about structural, but what does it look like really? How do you think that it invests itself either in policy, decision-making, at all? What does it look like?
So we are about an industry that we are overworked and not enough people doing the job. My lens prioritizes the things that are important to me and easy to me and have the most value for me. Oh, you have something. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. What I have to value your thing in keeping with what I value. it is intentional and unintentional. I'm not going to talk about motive. I'm going to say that when we don't intentionally acknowledge that we have to prioritize other vantage points, we run out of time, and someone else's vantage point takes second seat.
Gotcha. So let me try. Yeah, I mean, I think that's valuable to the younger artists that are working in terms of coming into a Horizon without, you know, you can speak candidly. What did it meet your expectation? For anybody walking Horizon or any theater, predominantly white institution coming, what was your expectation? Did it meet it? Did it disappoint it in terms of how you be treated as an African American artist?
I think it met my expectation in the sense of being able to be in a room of mixed cultured people and having that safe space to get my thoughts out and express what it is I wanted to express. But coming from like a working under those shows and meeting different people and working with different people, I think what you were talking about, Tom, the racism thing, for me, it looks like, you know, like just so much as a stage manager calling me boy, you know, backstage and feeling comfortable doing that and not being held accountable. Other things like producing the same children's show for the past 12 years, but how many times have that child star has been a little Black girl, you know? So there's not that much representation there on the stage. And I wouldn't say it was like a disappointment or anything like that, but it was just like, okay, I see for what it is now. I see what my professors were talking about. I see what my mentors have been talking about. So,
Jarrell, James, Amina, do you concur? Do you differ?
I would agree. I would say that in college, though, I attended a PWI, so I was able to come to Horizon and not feel as though I needed to code switch, that I could be my authentic self within there. But even within that, you know, it's like, how much of your authentic self do you still get to be looked at as the same as your peers? You know that you
well, right there becomes the thing that we're talking about, censorship. And
right.
What we're doing now, I think, is it's almost apologizing for the institution for feeling the way we do. You know, and I'm not thinking, but I'm saying that's what often we do. We lose our voice. We lose our tongue. We say, I will get along, I will go along to get along, as opposed to we have to be the change that we demand. And so I understand it puts all of us at risk. I mean, I've been fired 4 times in predominantly white institutions because it was, can't go along with that. And so there's always a risk in that. But what is it to be a principled artist in these times when the call to justice is greater than just having a job? What does that look like?
That's a word. That's a word. That's a word, Tom. I mean, when the call to justice is greater than getting a job. You know, the thing that we have to be so careful of as Black people, whether we're working in our own organizations or working with PWIs, is that we don't sacrifice ourselves for the sake of getting along or for the fear of being ostracized or, you know, not having an opportunity. I think that something that Marguerite said made me think of the idea of white oblivion and how dangerous that notion is, you know, and I'm been pretty vocal. You know, I can only give white oblivion so much credit. I mean, you cannot operate a business in Atlanta and not know Black people don't live here. We live here. We are everywhere. And so after a while, your white oblivion is a white choice. It's like, well, you know, I'm making these decisions because, as Marguerite said, this is the lens I look through, but I only want to look through that lens. Or, you know, I fear, and that was a question, like we should talk about what are the fears, both from the PWIs, but also for people who work with PWIs. I feel I will lose my ground and my stakehold if I really just step back and let things be fair. If I do not monopolize opportunities and control things so closely and keep it so close to the vest? What will I lose? What is the fear of that? You know, so those are the things that came to my mind with the discussion. But I think you said an entire word with that, that it's not about a job, because we as storytellers and Black people who are responsible to not only tell our history, but also create new ideas and thoughts about who we are as a people, we have a bold responsibility to stand flat-footed and say, oh, this is who we are, like Renee said. Yeah.
And I think also that there is a real strategic role that allies, and I'm talking about PWIs as allies, predominantly white institutions as allies, because I think many of them are. Many of them move forward. But many of them began doing this, even the canon of some Black work, because of the amount of work that was being done years ago from other institutions. And they kind of absorbed some of that. My fear is that if we don't work it, well, Malcolm said years ago, you can't sit at the dinner table with nothing on your plate and call yourself a diner. You know, no, all you are is hungry. So all too often we walk into these institutions as wanting to be diners, wanting to participate strategically in the decision making, wanting to be empowered, but we have nothing on our plate. And so part of what the call of institutions are all around is having more on your plate to bargain with. I've had institutional leaders say, I would love to do that play, but it's too risky. And I'm like, but art is risk. The very core and center of what we do as theaters and as artists is to risk every day. But you won't risk in this climate or in any climate telling stories that may be dangerous. Isn't that what we're supposed to be doing? And if we don't push that envelope, then again, to your point, I think, I mean, of having to play, you know, this all the time, not much, but having, not even that scary, but having to play what somebody else dictates we play, as opposed to being part of the policy and decision making of saying, hey, you want to operate within a circle of Black art, let's be partners. Let's have a real conversation about what that work should be, not what you deem is going to be safe for your audiences. That's, I think, where, for me, how systematic racism operates in the policy, in the decision making, in the divesting of power of artistic choice from the very artists that they're asking to be responsible for it. But I've waxed on too much. Go ahead, Brittany.
Go ahead, Brittany.
No, I was just going to say that that's why it's more difficult to ask young artists to step up and protest and put, you know, what they believe ahead of booking the job, because the institutions are not set up to have that support behind them. And if no one on staff, no one on the board, you know, looks like them or is representative of them, who's going to stand up and say, no, you can't fire this artist because they spoke their mind? Who has their back in those institutions? So I think in some ways it's unfair, you know, to younger people like myself, I know I'm getting older, you know, to expect us to step into these institutions and say, we need to burn it down. You know what I mean? It's got to all go. I think that's hard, you know?
I totally agree.
Yeah.
But it wasn't easy for Harriet Tubman either.
Right? And
it wasn't easy for Fannie Lou. I mean, what I'm saying is we rest on a tradition of it not being easy. Kennedy said, we're going to the moon, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. You know, we understand that any struggle for liberation, any struggle for cultural democracy, any struggle for justice is hard. But I agree with you. You don't out on the limb by yourself, have it sawed off, and therefore there were 9 other Britneys waiting to take your place.
Yeah, and like I grew up, again, I always reference my grandmother, but she was the first African-American, period, to work in HR in Richland School District 1. First one, period. And she would always tell me, you get in that job, you do a good job, you put your head down so you can make room for the next young Black woman coming up behind you. So if I go in there and I run around and lose my mind and act a fool, then what happens to the next Brittany that comes along? You know, they'll be like, well, we don't want to do that. That might not be the one.
Therein lies, I think, the center of the issue. We shouldn't have to be reliant on having to be the Jackie Robinsons and, you know, on the Serena Williams of our industry. And I think it's what artists said. There are 2 trains running. One is how you begin to exert pressure internally to those PWIs, and how, to everyone else's point, you create institutions that then can be strategic partners. If we're looking at the reallocation of resources, which is what Defund the Police was about, and we're saying, let's look at that in terms of cultural literacy, maybe what we're saying is, let's look at the resources that are allocated to these institutions, and those that aren't serving the larger interest of a city that's 70% Black, maybe we need to reallocate those resources. Maybe we need to put them into institutions and consortium sector. So then we can do as many Black plays of all stripes. And we then also can allow ourselves to be strategic partner and allies to these PWIs that also want to do that work. We come to the dinner table with something on our plate. So you, Brittany, the artist, don't have to step out there specifically by yourself. Go ahead, King. It looked like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say that like you said with the Harriet Tubmans and the ones that came before, and Brittany with your grandmother, it's understanding, having that knowledge of, sometimes even having that knowledge that there was somebody that came before you that fought the fight, makes you feel like you're not alone, makes you understand that you're not alone in the fight. What the groundswell of things that have happened, that are happening now, I know, Tom, you can speak to this. I know Adaye and Renee and Connor, I know you can speak on this. It's understanding that what we're looking at now, that groundswell of the youth movement and everything like that, happened generationally. It's happened in past generations, and understanding that a lot of the reasons why it moved, it was because it was a support system. And so having that support system and understanding that you're not alone, especially in those rooms where you are the only person in the room, where you are the only person of color in the room and sitting in there and feeling like you have so many responsibilities heaped up upon you, it makes it very difficult to even breathe, to even be comfortable doing just your central job that they put down in your contract. You're supposed to do this character. You got 80 other things sitting on you being like, no, I have a responsibility for the people after me. But knowing that I have people around me that are supporting me, that are encouraging me, helps me to gravitate within the room knowing that. And also, before you even get in the room, being encouraged and being supported and that is something that helps. That is something that helps get my strength up. That is something that helps get my courage up to speak. I just got to the point now, even in the career that I've had, where I recognize that I had a voice to open up and speak out against things and speak out for things and things of that nature. I had to recognize it, but I also had people feeding into me to let me know that your words do matter, your position does matter, and you have an opportunity to speak on things that'll help the people beyond, and help yourself, and help the people that came before, so that it continues on.
Yeah, I think Brittany said. Yeah, Brittany said something that just touched my heart when you talked about your grandmother, and I think what happens a lot of times for Black artists is that we got to realize a lot of this work is personal work that we have to do on ourselves. And a lot of that is about claiming your lineage. What is your lineage? You know, not just your grandmother, but what are the artists who came before you that are going to be your foundation when you go into these oppressive spaces and have to deal with this bullshit? Because the reality is, it's like, you know, I think it's something James said earlier too. It's like, I don't go into any space code switching. I'm the same nigga in a room full of niggas that I am in a room full of white folks. There's no code switching happening. And I also come with the same confidence because I know my lineage. I know the people that came before me. You know, it's like, I know who Bert Williams is and how important he was as an artist. So I never feel as if I'm less than. And I also don't, and I also think a lot of it is about our framework and our own gaze. It's like, I don't work for white institutions. I collaborate with them. I don't work for them. I collaborate with them. And when I go into a room in a white institution, I know that this is a collaboration because I have something to offer. And I think it's so important for Black artists to know that they have something to offer. And that gives you the power to speak your mind and to say no and to say yes when it's appropriate. But knowing that lineage and knowing that you have something to offer, I think is the most crucial lesson. And that's work. And that's what we all have to do individually and collectively.
I agree. And that's not arrogance. That's just a certain confidence. I agree, understanding, but that comes from certainly the worth of our culture. Let me shift ever so slightly. We talked about the things that we struggle against. What are we willing to stand for? Does it mean to be a principled artist in these times? What are you willing to give up your job for? I start with the younger artists. What are you willing to give up?
I'm willing to give up my just my background and where I come from, just to appeal to the younger generation who comes after me, because I come from a very rough high school. I know that I don't sound like it. I sound like I come from a very institution, a greater high school, a good high school.
We're not a monolith. You amongst family. We know we're not a monolith.
Yes. Come from a very rough high school where we had we had metal detectors, and you hear that other schools who get shot up don't have metal detectors, but we've been watched, we've been treated as if we are going to prison, and I've been going to college. I had to relearn everything. I had to relearn how to study because I wasn't in the right classrooms. I was in the classrooms that were that they didn't care about those people. Teachers, it's like, just graduate and get out. We don't have to deal with you. So when I went to college, I had to relearn how to study and all my study habits, and I had to be willing to understand my culture more and understand that I can just be who I am, no matter if I come from a rough background, no matter if you meet my people, it doesn't matter. We are all humans at the end of the day. And I want people to understand that it does not matter that my background isn't what you strategically think that it is. It's just as every Black person's background. We all go through hardship.
What are you willing to give up? I shift.
Yeah.
What are you willing to, I got you. Let's shift on. What are you willing to die for? King said, if you're not willing to die for something, you're not willing to live. What are you willing to die for? What will you put on the line in terms of the struggle as an artist?
Gerard.
Yeah, go ahead, Amina. You got the mic.
If you say what I'm willing to give up, I hope I'm answering
what
the question. What am I willing to die for?
Yes. As an artist.
My freedom and my voice as an artist, because that's the whole point of being an artist. So, I'm not willing to give up anything. And if I feel like I have to give up something, if I feel like I have to change who I am for someone else, then I'm not living. And I'm not willing to just be in a space and be dead spiritually or artistically. So I'm willing to fight. And I think that's the beautiful thing about our generation, is that we're saying, I'm not settling for just anything. I want to live a full life. And that's what I want to do as an artist. And so I'm just listening and hearing out the spaces. So yeah, that's all I have right now. But yeah.
No, that's good, and that's good. But I only pose that question that you don't necessarily have to answer today. But that if we're not understanding what it is that we'll die for as a principled artist, then firing becomes minimal. Being fired from a job. Once I realize I can get a job, I have enough confidence in my skill set. Job is the last thing. It's what are we trying to do to change the climate? And with that, go ahead, Derek.
I like a lot of what Amina just said, and a little bit about what Dai said before. But it's just
Derek,
for
you didn't like
young
what I said?
artists.
No, I'm playing.
I love everything you're saying. I'm really look. I'm sitting here. I was feeling a little wounded, right? I think us as young artists, I think we're at a position and we have an advantage to where we don't have these ties with these theaters where we've been working in this field for so many years, and we're relying on healthcare, we're relying on these certain benefits. We don't have that. So I think that does spark some fire in us to say, no, we're not okay with you doing one play a year. Now you're saying you're going to do 3. No, we're not okay with 3. No, and what you said, Adai, is us knowing that what we have is valuable, and us just knowing that and taking ownership in that. My art has value because I said it did, and just believing that. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Let me shift to Renee, because I have a very specific question for you, Renee. In the next, but did you have something to add to this?
I do. I want to address Brittany and Derek and Amina and Jarrell. I think it's time for something new. And a long time ago, we had the choirs of 50, 60 people singing together. Then it went to the band, like 8, 9, 10, 20 people. Then it went to the group, like 4 people. Now we all walk alone. It's the singer. And so often we talk, it's what I need. I think we're going to have to come back and support each other. we're going to have to support you before you get in the room, so that you feel strengthened. I only learned a couple of years ago that I can speak out to my ancestors, and I learned that through theater. I didn't know, and it works. It works on my behalf. But I think it's time for us to try something new, because I hear you talking, and as long as we stay individuals, we're gonna there's just gonna be strength in our unity, and we have to find a way to come back together again.
Does that make your job easier, Marguerite? Because I know you're an advocate on the inside. You're an advocate internally in terms of fighting the fight at the table. But what is it that you need as a support from artists in the larger community?
So I am so energized and so pleased by two things. The fight in the street has given me weapons in the room that I didn't have. My mother, who is 85, that y'all know I take care of, saying to me several weeks ago, baby, if you have to quit, we'll figure out how to make it. Those two things was all I needed, because I'm a fighter. I'm constantly fighting. I'm constantly trying to agitate, but you can only get so far if there is no momentum from behind to make the full movement.
Absolutely.
I will speak to Enoch and say, people like Enoch have always understood the knowledge that his elders had and would always come. And he's not the only one, Brittany, he's not the only one, but would say, Marguerite, you got a minute? And I always knew if I got that text message, I would go into the hall and call him back, because I knew he was in a negotiation, he was in a decision-making period, and he was like, talk to me, sis, here's what they're telling me. I never told him what to do. I just said, okay, here's what I'm hearing now. And he'd go, okay, thanks. I mean, so when the even younger generation is like, what are y'all gonna do for us? I'm gonna tell you, the middle generation learned how to use us, even though we didn't have the outward power we might have needed, but they knew we had access to answers. So now I'm just grateful for the riot. I'm grateful for the riot. I am grateful for the riot. Thank you. Because I never lost my voice. I just didn't have no backup.
I go back to what Chappelle said, don't mistake my silence for being complicit.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because
the streets have spoken. And it is our job as from elders to not lead this movement. You have to lead this movement. It's our job to help pave ways and make sure that you don't get beat up and are casualties in the process. Go ahead, Brittany. I didn't mean to cut you off.
I just wanted to say that Marguerite pointed out a good point, because she said that, you know, some of us do recognize, you know, the eldership and the mentorship that is there and that is available to us. I would just like to ask, I found a lot of mentorship time doing your show at Horizon. And Enoch even took me under his wing, right, gang? Mm-hmm. And so how do you get to these young artists if they first don't get the job? Because that was the most mentorship that I had received from the community, because I was in the room with all of you. So then how do we get to these younger artists if they can't get in the room with you? I didn't even, you know, I learned so much about Jumaane and all those things just last summer. I mean, I'm not from Atlanta. So how do we get that? How do we get that to the younger generation?
I'll spin that conversation in a minute. Look, go ahead, Rob, and then go ahead, Amy. You're muted, Rob. We can't hear you.
Okay.
There you go.
There was a time when we didn't have a choice, but we had to go through Black organizations to get our feet. You know, we had to. That was our access point to even a broader audience. That was our training ground. You know, when I made it to Atlanta in the 80s, everybody knew that if anybody who was anybody was coming through Jamandi Productions. From the most revered actor to the half-ass actor I was. But if you were going to be in a show, you were coming through. And I really want to figure out how to kind of revisit that in regards to dispel the myths and break down the barriers where we as people who know, we may have a little more knowledge, but we're not better. We're here to really support the fight that you are doing, but it's hard to support the fight of young people who don't see us as a value to you. We may not agree. Hell, I didn't agree with a lot of my elders, but they had so much things to give me. Like, it took me 20 years to even appreciate half the shit I was taught 20 years ago. I'm looking 20 years later like, damn, Lamar said this crazy shit and this was 100. He's absolutely right. So bridging the gap, not a shameless plug. Of course, one of the reasons that I created the Dominion Arts Foundation, one of the reasons that I created Dominion Entertainment Group, as hard as it has been to sustain a for-profit production company in Atlanta, one of the reasons was I just wanted to create a platform and access for my friends with the $2 that I had. And we have to kind of not become so high and mighty that we realize that some of the jewels and the gems we're going to get, and we ain't going to get a dime from it. We're going to get that information.
They're telling me we got to wrap up in about 5-10 minutes. I want to get to you, Ken. But to your question quickly, Brittany, when we started Jamandi, we did it on $857. We funded our first play with a car wash. What I'm saying is, if you have something to say, where you have two actors and a blanket, you have theater. And I think part of what we can do is to say, how do you increase the landscape upon which we do this so that we can say to funding sources, let's reallocate. There should be no reason why hundreds of young African-American artists aren't working doing their stories, whether it's solo work, whether it's devised work, whether it's ensemble work, whether it's doing it in conjunction with a theater, whether it's doing it in conjunction with themselves, whether it's doing it where there is a need and a hunger, you do it. Let us coalesce around your hunger to do it. We can provide you a means to get there. You don't have to worry about, the one show at Horizon or at Alliance or at anywhere else. If you're saying there's no place for me, Quincy Jones said, where there's no place for you in the culture, you will invent one. We have to incentivize you to invent your place in the culture and let us subsidize that. Go ahead, King.
One of the things that I recognize and realize that I've spoken to people about is one of the things, the lack of knowledge of a historical aspect of the Black theaters, especially in Atlanta. I speak specifically of Atlanta. And I know on the personal side of it, like, even though I grew up in Atlanta, it took me years, even after I started my artistic career, to really, really know about the history of Jamandi and the theaters around Atlanta that were gone by the time I got there. So the people that I've been able to interact with Jeffrey Williams and Tom and people who were a part of Jamandi and those other companies, I got to know them because I worked with them. And then I got to know a better understanding of that history. And so I don't knock anybody for coming into this space and not knowing, because you don't know, a lot of times you don't know when you don't really have a knowledge of it. Because a lot of the people that were working back then weren't working now. So when they come up and say, good job, you go like, thank you. But, oh, your name is what? Elizabeth Omalami? What is that name? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So when that happens, and I personally put responsibility on myself as between that in-between aspect of it, which is why one of the things me and Cynthia, when we were doing the light, we wanted to make sure that we had the black artists, the Black apprentices in the room so they could have that experience. It was one of the things that we fought for after we recognized our voice, after getting the knowledge from Adaye and Tom Jones and Robert Connor and Renee, understanding them telling us that we have a voice, and Marguerite telling us we have a voice in the room to make that room, to make that space what we want to make it. So I took that knowledge, and ask other people to be into the room so I can let them know that as you grow into this thing, knowing that you have that voice. And so there's that in-between aspect of it that I really want to make sure that that is cultivated, because there is knowledge to be gained on that aspect to help you get your strength to go further along. That's why I keep asking Adaye questions, keep asking Marguerite, keep asking Tom and Rob and Renee questions, because I need to know as I continue on my career how to move further so I can help pass it along, so they can help pass it along, and this cycle can continue. So like you said, Tom, in the meeting a couple of days ago, so that 10 years from now, we're not having the same damn conversation that we're having right now.
Yep. I'll get to you, Adaye. I want to shift slightly, but I'll hit you before we shift slightly. And one to say, to co-sign, it's our job, and maybe we have not been available enough in terms of making those bridges. And so where we are responsible, hold us responsible. But we hold you responsible is in asking for more than what you're asking for. And so in that duality and that conversation, we have to empower you to ask for more than what we asked for. And where sometimes we are at odds is you saying, no, we asked for that already. You have to ask for more. I started this with, what world do you dream? If I don't know what world you dream, I don't know what to fight for. I don't know how to fight for you. I can't fight for you just getting a job, because your talent will get you that job. Your talent will get. What I can fight for you is economic justice, that you get paid well for that job. What I can fight for is that you have the opportunity to tell the stories you want to tell. That's our responsibility to each other. Turning that, and I promise I'll get to you, Doc. What is our responsibility now to the larger movement? And I turn to you first, Renee, and I'll go back to you, Moon. In terms of, came over a weekend where we're watching Black children being shot by ourselves. What is our responsibility as artists to this movement that is reformation, revolution, and reform? How do we speak and use our voices to that larger issue, not just our concerns when we get into the institution? Renee, go, because I know it hits close to you.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, I was speaking with Tom today, and I said always in every movement, the artists had large voices. Their voices were very, very large. Where is our rhythm? We're not grooving to anything. There's a protest going on and there's not even a groove in the streets. What are we doing? Asking for a job. Everybody has platforms. I feel like everybody take what you do and make a statement as many times as you can for motivating the people that are out there protesting, helping us, soothing. We've got to speak up. If you're playing, play the instrument. If you do tracks, do the track. If somebody's gonna do a track and speak on top of it, do it. It's so much that we don't know. There's so much about politics and history that we don't know. Let's set it to a beat. Let's help us. That's what we do as artists. That's what we can do, and we don't need to wait to 2021 when the theaters open up again. We can do that.
Jay-Z made $1 billion around hip hop. When you look at Diddy, they own the means of the voice of, they organize their lives around their passion, and then made $1 billion doing that, and now can fund and subsidize what those movements are. Why are we not following that model that's happened in hip hop? Why are we not organizing around the passion and stories of what we're telling and figuring out how to monetize them so that we can continue to tell those stories in any which way we want? So you don't have to worry, Jarrell, about whether or not you want to play a Nazi or Jew. You play it because you have subsidized it. You don't have to get permission to do you. And that's what we're doing. We're asking permission to be our own Black genius. I'm saying we have to speak as a community to each other about monetizing what we're doing so we can do any damn thing that we want. Go ahead, Moon.
Yeah, I'm going to try to address what Brittany said, but also the question you just asked, and something somebody asked in one of the question and answer section in the chat. Tom gave me my first professional gig when Jumaande was still around. And so I totally understand what you were saying about, I mean, to me, that was my entryway into the Black theater community in this town. I also had like professors who were like really well known and well respected in the Black theater community. And that gave me my interest way. What I realized as I started to grow and evolve as an artist was that these people are so accessible, extremely accessible, and really available. But I think a lot of it is about cultivating relationships and not necessarily, networking. And I would really encourage the generation, because I'm not that damn old. I'm like right around Knox age. I'm not trying to make me feel like a fucking elder. But the gray, I know I'm not that old though. But I think it's really important for the generations behind us to know that cultivating relationships is crucial. It's not about networking with elders or making connections. It's about cultivating relationships. It's like these people that I know, these elders in this room I consider family, an artistic family. And cultivating relationships takes time and it takes work, and you don't ask for anything in return. And once you cultivate those relationships, then you have this posse of amazing people who will always be there to support you. But I would encourage any of the younger generation to know that it takes time, but to also know too that, when you approach these interactions, approach them with an open mind. I try to be as humble as possible, no matter the age of the person that I'm dealing with, because I'm a teacher, and as a teacher, I always have something to learn. And I think it's important for all of us to be open to learn, but also being open to developing real, authentic relationships that have nothing to do with the art at all. And to me, that's where the magic happens.
And I'd say this. I think it's time for Action Arts Plan 2021. Where we assemble all of our artists and we sit down and we plan and we strategize and we fund. There is no reason why Dominion should ever struggle for $1. There's no reason why True Colors should struggle for $1. There's no reason why you shouldn't have a job. There's no reason why we shouldn't have strategic partnerships with these white institutions. I think they're doing as good a job as they can, but their job isn't to cater to our genius. It's our job. We have the responsibility. And where they want to do the August Wilsons and the show, they should, and we can partner with them. But when we want to have that other conversation about things, then we have to be in a position fiscally to do it. So this is my challenge to all of you. Action Arts Plan 2021, that we commit to sitting down and talking about mentorship, fund development, creative development. We commit to that institution, and in a year's time, we become the change we want to see. That's how ended kind of sort of. Go ahead, Rob.
Just on, you mentioned mentorship, and Adalia was talking about these people are accessible. I'm not a real good on the Instagram. I got 4 fake accounts now, and I don't know how to get rid of them. But out of the blue, this young man just reached out to me. They don't know him from a can of paint. He says, "Hey, I'd like to shadow you if it's possible." I didn't know this kid at all. I said, "Oh, really?" He said, "Yeah, I've heard about you. Can I just sit in the room?" He said, "Are you working on a project?" I said, "Yeah, I'm working on a project." So for the next 2 months after he got off work, he would come in the room and just sit in the back. And after the process, he had a lot of questions. And now I was like, "Hey, I think I want to bring you in on this. You think you might want to come in and assist me on this?" Just based on the relationship that he was open to ask. I mean, we could, there will always be personality differences, and it ain't even about being anybody's friend. Even our old heads, we've had our fair share of fights and disagreements and high times and low times. But at the end of the day, we have a regard and respect for each other. And so that's what keeps us together as artists. And we want to have that same relationship people who will be the torchbearers of our stories.
And can I piggyback on that just for a second?
Yeah, and then Marguerite, we're going to go to you with the questions, okay? And then we'll wind up.
And cool. Brittany, probably the reason that you had such incredible mentorship during the show last year is because you were fierce and you brought so much to the show, because that means a lot. That means a lot to people. If a lot of reasons that a lot of people, and I'm not being mean, but I'm very serious about when a person respects the show, and we can see that. We can see that there's a lot of young people. I work with a lot of people in Atlanta, Georgia, and there's a lot of young people that's not on their game, or they got in the room and then they were lazy in the rehearsal process. And I don't want to talk to that person. I'm angry with that person now. I don't want to have a relationship with that person because we need each other. We are a we when we do a show. You can't do a show by yourself. You can't be in the scene by yourself. We have to have each other. And when somebody doesn't respect that process, it's just really hard to want to be in a relationship with them. But I just wish you always bring your A game and see if those doors won't open for you. Because
And I did still think we didn't, thank you, but we didn't touch that larger question of what is our, and we'll do it at another point, what is our responsibility to social justice in the streets? Because we still have to formulate what is that answer. There are kids being shot. There are issues of voter registration. There are issues of voter suppression. There are issues of economic justice, of income inequality. Those are real issues that are bread and butter issues that are affecting our people. There's a medical pandemic that is committing genocide on us. How do we respond to that? And we as artists can't be so myopic and caught up in what our value is to these institutions without valuing the communities and the constituencies we serve, and what work do we do in advancing the larger issue of economic, social, and political justice. I'll end with that. Marguerite, what are the questions?
Kalundra Smith, do you want to have your mic unmuted and ask your own question? Okay, I don't know how that works. So Kalundra is a theater journalist.
Okay.
She has had bylines in New York Times, TCG, the whole bit. Her question is, what is the role of theater journalists and critics could play in elevating the voices of Black theater artists?
That's a great question. I'll start and then I'll go to Adai and then to Rob and then anybody else in the room. First of all, I think what Harold Cruz talked about it in the 1960s in his book, Crisis of the Negro Intellectual, where he began to say the role of the critic is advocate and conscience raising and in expanding not only the need for why there is a theater, why theater happens, but also what it is that people are coming to see. Very often you had white critics who look at your work through their own lens and have no idea what the cultural context is. Part of what I think the theater journalists can do is to create a context for what it is that we do, why we do what we do, and what it is that we're looking at, and then evaluate it on its terms, not on some kind of vague notion of Western theory. I'll turn it to anybody else. Adai?
Yeah, I will also say Kalundra can unmute herself too now, but go on Adai, and Kalundra, you speak to it after Adai talks.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I've had the pleasure of reading Kalundra's work, and she does that work. And we greatly appreciate that. We greatly appreciate that. But it would be so wonderful if there are more critics who were really well-versed in the Black canon, in Black aesthetics, and that just has not been the case locally or nationally. My thing is, I don't know if you should be reviewing a Black show if the only Black show you've ever read or seen is an August Wilson play. You've got to be as educated in our work as we are when we deal with your work. And I think that's really, really crucial.
I'd like to piggyback and say that Kalundra or whoever the maybe other Black critic in town is, should not be the single person in the room. There needs to be if our demographic represents more than 50% of the population, why would Kalundra Smith, who is a highly lauded, respected journalist, be the single voice or that person that is the primary voice that reviews Black plays? It's just unheard of in a city like Atlanta that the main critics are these European kind of ideologists that will want to compare a European ideal to the work of the Black storyteller, and there's sometimes no marriage there. So I just think it's unfair.
And the second thing is we have to know that there is a Black storyteller. Are we really as engaged in terms of audiences, issues of audience engagement with all the sectors of our audiences? Are we really speaking to people in senior centers? Are we really speaking to the marginalized communities that may not have a ticket? Are we really creating the largest audience possible that's engaged in our stories? And where is it that the journalists can become part of provoking that conversation, creating a larger consciousness for why theater is important in the first place? Go ahead. I'm sorry, Marguerite. Unmute yourself, Marguerite.
Ah, Kalandra, do you want to speak on to this issue, darling, before we move on to something else?
No, thank you all for answering my question. I appreciate it. I've just been listening to the.
Bless your heart, you froze. Okay. But you know, hey, sis. Okay. So Matt Reynolds, do you want to address your question? It was kind of involved.
Sure. So I'm wondering how we move forward with what we call the canon. There's been a big push lately. I know I've seen sessions on it for the last few years at SCTC about firing the canon, getting rid of the canon and changing what we consider the canon, which is all well and good and necessary to an extent. How do we address theater history without addressing minstrelsy? How do we address, talk about how to teach theater without talking about Shakespeare, and moving forward with representation, we don't want to check boxes to say, okay, this is the Black play, as Jarrell mentioned earlier, or this is the anti-realist play, or this is the musical, etc. But it's really hard to find a play that is at all times representative of the LGBTQIA community, is representative of the BIPOC community, moving forward as a society. So how do we do that?
Okay, thank you, Matt.
Let me start, Matt, because I think it's a good question. Nobody's talking about getting rid of the canon. We're saying that that cultural democracy and cultural literacy just means everybody's story is being told. So if you're telling Shakespeare, then you also talk Gustavus Vassa. If you're doing Aristotle, you're also doing Jupiter Hammond. You have to start, even if you teach even playwriting. I've taught at George Mason, and we had to start with Aristotle's Poetics. You have to start with that. Nobody's getting rid of the canon. But at the same time, you also have to teach Paul Carter Harrison's The Drama of Nomo. You have to couple them together so that understand that there is a dimensionality to African American literature that is not specific to one worldview. You don't get rid of the canon. That's ridiculous. You make the canon more inclusive. That's what cultural literacy is. I'll yield to anybody else.
Tom, Tom, what I want to say, the fact that we live in this vast technological age right now, and yet it's very easy, and it's nothing to the person that asked the question, but in general, it's very easy to be like, I don't know. I just think there's more. I think there's more opportunity to gain the knowledge, to do the research, and for the works that you are looking and searching for. But you have to do. There are things that you have to do. You have to do that research. Tom, you just said some names and you just said some plays that I wasn't aware of. But now that I have the knowledge, now I'm going to go, let me see what he's talking about. Let me go and find out what he's speaking of. We have a Daye Moon, who dramaturg extraordinaire, who has a vast knowledge of it, a vast knowledge of these different plays and things of that nature. So there's an ability to find these things. What happens is there is complacency when it comes to this stuff. And so it's a whole lot easier to be like, oh, well, let's fine. Joe Turner's come and gone, or Two Trains Running. Let's just throw that out there. Now Dominique's name is getting more out there in the same way. But it just requires you really taking the time to do the research, taking the time to look at these plays, and taking the time to really find out these names and everything. They're not that lost in the history of it. You just have to take the time. These people have to take the time. This is not just a PWI situation. This is the knowledge that if I know I ain't got it, I know people that come under me ain't got it, because it's something that we have to acquire. But you got to do the work as well. Reach out and try to find out some different things about it. And don't be upset and feel some type of way if you don't know. You just don't know.
I'm going to throw it to James in a minute because I saw you have. Let me just say this: systematic racism is systematic for a reason. It is baked in and hardwired into the very ways in which we receive our information. The educational system is hardwired to have one historical point of view, hardwired to say that this is what you learn. You do learn Shakespeare, you do learn Marlowe, you do learn, go through the Greeks with Sophocles, et cetera, and the boys, but you don't necessarily go through, as you say, the canon of of Aimé Césaire. You don't go through the canon of Theodore Ward. You don't. That's cultural democracy and literacy. That it is about having to deal from a curriculum base from the very beginning. My graduating from school means I have to know your gods. You can graduate from school without having to know mine. So that's not cultural literacy. And if that's systematic, that's where it begins. Everything becomes seen through the lens of what you perceive. I had someone tell me the other day, the larger American story. Well, there's no larger American story. There's the American story that we're all a part of. But the minute you say larger, you then make means my story must be smaller. That's what systematic is. That's what we have to fight. Go ahead, James.
Die after James.
Matt, I just want to say, I think it's really important that we realize that the Western canon, the purpose of the Western canon is to reinforce white supremacy. Point blank, yes. And what we really have to think about, it's not about destroying the canon, it's about decolonizing that canon. When I teach Aristotle's Poetics, the next thing that I teach is Drama of Noma by Paul Carter Harrison. Because it's important for the students that I teach to know that this is one approach, one aesthetic approach to judging drama, and this is another one. And like Enoch said, the work is there. And I'm gonna push back and say that it's not that people don't know, people are just lazy. And they ain't doing their scholarship. You can always find a way of including difference into that canon to make it more full, more robust, and less oppressive.
And also to your point, Adai, they're not required to know.
Right.
Their success is not contingent upon having to know our story.
And that's the whole point.
Get that degree without having read Ted Ward's Great White Fog. You don't have to do that.
But mine is.
Baldwin.
Mine is.
Go ahead, James.
James.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was going to speak on that in terms of being young. Like, you know, how do you do research? How do you find something that you didn't even know existed in the first place? How do you, if you don't have an OG in your corner, if you don't have somebody who's putting these like lingerings or leaving these seeds for you to find some knowledge that can grow into something else, how do we as young people know that history? How do we as young people even get the chance to explore that, even get the chance to know what we're researching? It's like, sure, we would love to do that research, but where do we start?
James, how many of us are the first in our families to even do this? They had to step out and be these artists on our own. I'm sure the elders were not, you know, it wasn't popular to be an artist, but they had more of a community maybe to step into than we have here. Like, how do you know what exists?
Can I just say this?
Go ahead, Rob. Rob, go ahead.
Okay. You all are the probably most proficient researchers in the world. With the technology that exists, I'll use Twitter as an example because I don't really know Twitter, but what I found out, if you click on this and you click on that and you click on this and it leads to that and you click on this and you click on this and then you discover a whole new world. You got to use the same acumen that you indulge when you use your technology as you would use towards your cultural heritage. Use that same thirst for navigating through those things, the same tactic you use to go through Twitter and find something that you didn't even realize was there. That's the same thing you do.
Can I speak on that though?
Ask Google a question.
But let me. I want to speak on this because I didn't have an undergraduate theater degree because that wasn't what you did as a Black person. You got a degree to get a job. I might have been in theater from kindergarten through 12th grade, but after that, you prepared for a job. When I was in the work world and it was like, I can't take this, and now I want to be an actor, I was behind the 8 ball. I didn't know nobody. I didn't have any OGs because I didn't know what an OG looked like. My butt went to the library. This was before Google. My butt would sit on the floor in the library and just flip through plays going, oh, there are no Black people in this one. Okay. Oh, there are no Black people in this one. Okay. I remember the first time I was in New York and I went to the the publisher's store, and I went, oh, this ain't gonna work. There were plays all over. I had not a clue what to do next. Not a clue what to do next. So I just started, I would walk out if I saw there was anything Black, if there was a Black anthology, if there was one character that was Black, I would just buy 10 books and go home and say, I hope one of these says something to me. When I finally stumbled into a room in Houston with Black actors at the ensemble, I didn't fit. Because them Negroes looked at me like, girl, you don't know Jack. What you doing here? So y'all like, why isn't anybody embracing us? People don't embrace you until they see your hunger. And I just kept showing up, being out of place. And then by the time I got to Atlanta, showing up and being out of place. And then I just started, listening, going to the library. When I look at some of y'all, because some of y'all have been my apprentices, and I say, baby, you got Google. Oh my God. You don't have to sit on the floor in a bookstore that has one shelf of plays.
Let me also piggyback on, let me pick up, because I think that's what Marguerite speaks to, I think, is we had to be Herculean. And I'm saying in terms of you shouldn't have to be. Right. You know, James, you should not have to be Herculean to find that. It should be there and available. And part of what I think the struggle in terms of is to make sure these theaters that have these Theater for Youth programs, that we begin to demand that there is a curriculum that is all inclusive, all embracive. We have to speak to these schools, and you shouldn't have to like hunt down your history. That is exactly what systematic looks like. That's what we have to deconstruct, so that you are already empowered with information and knowledge. Once you know and have a value of yourself, nobody can come take that away from you.
Right.
You know, that's why you could walk to your question earlier, Brittany, walking into a rehearsal and knowing your value. It's because I know my value. I know the tradition I come from. I know I come from Fannie Lou Hamer. I know I come from Sojourner Truth. I know I come from that, not only in terms of a history of struggle, but from a tradition of scholarship and intellectualism that has brought me to this place. That has to be imbued in the educational system. We as artists have to insist that exists. That's what I'm talking about. What is the Action Arts Plan 2021?
Or like anyone else. Somebody. What I will do, I'm about to drop my email into the chat box, and it's gonna take me a couple of days, but I can pull together a bibliography of shit you need to read.
Absolutely.
And anybody who's listening is welcome to shoot me an email, and I'll send it to you. It'll take me a couple of days though, but I'm gonna put my email in the chat right now.
And that's where this begins. That we begin to I talked to Lark the other day, and she said she's going to create a database of all African-American technicians and designers, etc. That's what I mean by we have to begin to create an action arts plan that says, what are the issues? I mean, to your point, James, where do I go? You shouldn't have to worry about it. We are the change that we want to see. Those are the issues that we have to put on the table. And now it's a great question. How do we solve it? No one should have to do the Marguerite Hannah experience. You know? And that's our obligation to the next generation and to this and your responsibility to those coming behind you. Do we have any other questions? I'm sorry.
And one of the things, real quick, one of the things that was Tina Fields just said is the younger generation has the stamina and the elders have the wisdom. Absolutely. So there's something to be learned and to be on both ends of it. She also was saying like bridging the gap, like these conversations are those things that help facilitate that. And for the people that feel like it is who look respectfully toward the older generation, sometimes you look at it as beyond reach and everything. And I'll tell you first and foremost, like anybody that you're seeing in this room from the elder side of it is just a very accessible, like a lot, but like Adaya said, it may take a little time for me to get out there and reach it and everything like that, but very accessible. I go to Tom all the time asking him about different plays, different monologues and things of that nature. I'm always inquisitive in terms of finding out things that I don't know and sometimes even things that I didn't know that I don't know. And also on the Google aspect, I recently just Googled Black contemporary plays and Black contemporary playwrights, because I'm trying to find that, because that's something that I don't know on the contemporary side of it. And I found an anthology of a new book of new plays called Black Words, Black Lives, something of that nature that I can also impart to the people and everything like that.
So that becomes part of our agenda, that we have to create cultural literacy as you know, so that when we come out of here, that part of what we give you and what you give us is, this is a blueprint for what literacy looks like in terms of just, again, the canon, broadening what that is. We then go to our allies, strategic partners, white institutions, Black institutions, et cetera, and say, let us help structure a curriculum that deals with young people in the schools, so that when we go into the schools, we're teaching that. We're speaking to that, so they don't have to come back feeling ill-informed. That's where we create these strategic partnerships. That's where we expand the conversation. And we then begin to talk about, again, funding of new work. How does that happen? How do we begin to generate capital? How do we deal with mentorship? Those are issues that I think we just have to sit around, ask the question, and then we just answer it. And we begin to build a structure by which either we answer it in absentia, or we answer it with our white allies and PWIs, et cetera.
Tom, I think you will find so many young people who will be willing to go into the schools and to tell these stories and to help further the conversation if given the opportunity. I mean, the app goes on here like, yeah, we'll do it. I'm sure, like, we're always back to don't just ask for a job, but that's a job. And that would be reaching our younger peers, you know what I mean? And having the mentorship go through us, you know, to those younger people. I think that means so much. And so also back to what Enoch said about what Tina put in the chat.
Just to piggyback on that point.
Yeah.
Put a date on that, put a meeting on that. We'll assemble the people and we'll solve that.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
As I was going to say, I'm a hybrid on this panel. I've had 21 years working in arts education, 21 years, and I've had 40 years in professional entertainment. And what I do know that there is a bridge, there is a gap, which is why I've created my foundation, which is why I have the internship program, which are why I have those things. I'm even planning a series of symposiums called Behind the Scenes, and each symposium will represent a Black person who works behind the scenes. I've reached out to Corey Washington today and said, Corey, can you please do a workshop and just tell these young Black people how you became a production designer in Hollywood as a young Black person that came into Morehouse at 16 that didn't know anything about set design. So I think we all as elders can do our part with our platforms. I intend to do that. You know, so if anybody, regardless of what you know or what you think, would like to learn more or have access more, I am available to give everything I got.
And I pledge that. I pledge that to help create that thing, and that we will then go to these institutions, because they keep saying, this is a moment in time. Again, the streets have spoken. This is a moment in time that these white institutions are saying, what can we do? We're listening to you. So we can now say, what we want is to deal with cultural literacy, and we'll create that program, and we'll go, and any one of us will go, we'll create it, and we'll go to these institutions and make sure they fund it, partner it, and that again will provide more work. Go ahead, Brittany, you had something else.
Yeah, I've spoken to a couple of you about this, Mr. Connor Diet, Tom, and S. Renee, and I also think that if you see young people stepping out there and making moves, I think that the elders have to get behind them. You know what I mean? Like, we have to see that we have the support, of the generation before us. Excuse me. I know we had the Atlanta Solidarity March, and we marched and, we discussed it. And so, but I think we needed to see those elders behind us so that then we want to come back and we want to engage at the table, and have those conversations again. I think you need the support, so we feel like.
And that's why I'm saying we have to translate this to action.
Right.
That it has to be strategic. It has to be programmatic, so that you already have our support. We're here. Right. That's why we're sitting at this table. That's a good. That conversation we don't ever have to have again, ever. We don't have to have that conversation. What we now have to have the conversation is, what is the change that we want to see? And now let's begin. You already said Robert is, Rob's has 20 years in the educational, so he's a resource. Yeah. But he's also can say, I also have a school. I also then, if we create something programmatically, he can impose that on his school.
Right.
That's change. That's the change we want to see.
And
He
the
could
young
also
people
say,
will
I read a
respond.
group of artists from this panel to create so all of that's doable. I'm saying, let's commit to do it. That's all I'm suggesting. Marguerite, we probably have to wind this up, don't we?
Yeah,
I hate that.
almost.
We will reconvene. All I want to do is the end of every Tom Talks, whether you have a drink or don't, bring your
Can
glasses
we have
up,
some
bring your
more
head-
music? I'm ready to dance.
And all I say is go around and give your toast. I will start the toast by saying, first of all, thank you all for your collective genius, for your words, for your inspiration. I pledge to you that tomorrow will not look like today. Anybody else, take the toast.
This is the first Zoom meeting I've been in a while where I feel energized leaving. So I appreciate all y'all.
Hey, let
Go
your
out.
voices be heard during the protest, artists. Put your stuff out there.
Yes. Everybody's got a toast. Jarrell.
Toast to the inquisitiveness and the wisdom that the elders have given me tonight. I really appreciate listening to you all. It was amazing, and now I can take that with me forever.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Marguerite.
I toast to the fact that I just needed some more energy from behind. Thank you all.
Yeah, Brittany.
I toast to the young folks just continuing to stand up and know their value and know their truth.
Absolutely. Derek.
A toast to the wisdom and the new art that is to come after this.
Yes, sir. Amen. Amina.
I toast to the change that we're about to see, and this in itself is support. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate knowing that I have someone to go to. So toast to that.
Yes, ma'am. Rob.
I just toast to the conversation about growth and change and access. Tom, I toast you because you were one of the first people that hired me in Atlanta. And I just want to say, you have to understand that one takes on another. So to you, my friend, thank you for staying in the game.
Thank you, man. King.
To the youth, to the elders, to Bridging the Gap, to Tom Jones for whenever he called me, he know I'm always available. And to Marguerite Hair. Come on, Marguerite, with it. You better let that flow, girl. You better let it flow. Salute.
What Margot Moore I just saw, she said a toast to the future and to all of you. Thank you all for participating in this. This has been real.
Margot!
Love you like I mean it. Stay safe, everybody.
Amen.